Hi, it's been quite a long time since I've seen you. I'm sorry, I needed to take like a mental health break and just focus on how stressful my life has been. So anyway, I'm here. I'm back. So I'm going to try to put like 2 months into one video. So we're going to talk about the books that I read in April and May. In April I read technically 5 books and then I DNF'd one of them. In the way of statistics, as always, I can never remember the order that I usually do them in. But as you can tell, they're all paperbacks, so not a single hardcover was read in April. This is actually kind of surprising as well. I read 5 male authors and only 1 female author. Also, another surprising statistic, I read not a single 2019 book. These were all books published before 2019. I was in a nonfiction mood, so I read 3 nonfictions, 2 contemporaries, and 1 play. That was a comedy. The shortest book I read, it's complicated because like essentially it was 198 pages, but the book that I DNF'd, I only read 106 pages of it, even though it is longer than 106 pages. So I'm not really sure what to put, either the book that I DNF'd or the book that was actually the shortest that I read fully. So we'll go with that one. So 198 pages was the shortest book that I read. And the longest book that I read was actually not too long. It was only 327 pages. So pretty much total I read 1,461 pages. So that kind of averages out to like 48.7 pages a day. I read 2 2-star books, 1 3-star book, 1 3.5 stars, 1 4 stars, and 1 5 stars. So that averages to about 325 stars. Now before I go talking about the books in depth and in general, let's move on to the books I read in May and those statistics. So for May, I ended up reading 7 total books, which I'm so happy about. I read each of them for a specific reason in May, because in April there was a readathon that I did not know about until like halfway through April, and I was like, I've already missed it. But I figured I would just do it in May, as long as I do it before August, which is the second part of the readathon, I'm fine. But that's the magical readathon, and so it starts off with your owls, your OWLs, your something wizarding level examinations, whatever they're called. And then in August it'll be the newts. So I finally was a part of a readathon. I can explain the readathon further once I go more in depth with these books, but for now we're just going to talk about statistics. So I read 3 hardcovers and 4 paperbacks. 4 female authors, 3 male authors. I read 2 2019 books and 5 books that were published before 2019. I read 2 contemporary, 2 fantasy, 1 humor, 1 nonfiction, and 1 play. The shortest book I read was 167 pages. It was this one. And then the longest book I read was 378 pages. This one. So total I read 2,078 pages. So that averages to about 67 pages a day. Very impressed with that one. Especially since there was like a good week I did not read at all. Stars. This was a good month star-wise for books. Very happy with the month of May. I read 1 3-star. That was like the lowest of my stars. 3 4 stars. 2 4.5 stars. And 1 5-star book. So now that we're done with stats, let's go and talk about the books that I read in April. The first book that I read in April was this, No Fear Shakespeare, A Companion. It's pretty much just a non-fiction book about Shakespeare and his life, and mainly his plays, and it kind of like breaks down every single play. So I actually did enjoy this. I felt it was very formative, but I would have liked more information on his life, because they really didn't spend too much time on his life. Yeah, they pretty much just did this much on his life and then this much on all of his plays. Which I get, like he has a lot of plays, but I wanted to know more about him as a person and the time period that he was in, rather than just like a synopsis and deep dive into every single play. I also like that it actually gave me a plan on how to read his plays, because as you know, I've been trying to read at least 1 Shakespeare play every single month, and I've just been kind of like going at it randomly. But this actually kind of helps me. There were like some plays that, you know, you have to read in a specific order, and they like tell you which ones you should like really start off with, and so it actually gave me kind of like a plan for reading his plays. It was very thorough. I thought it was organized very well, so I really did enjoy this one, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was a Christian nonfiction, so you're more than welcome to skip this part if you want, or if you want to stick around and watch it. But that is Love Wins by Rob Bell, a book about heaven, hell, and the fate of every person who ever lived. I was not a fan of this one. I liked Rob Bell's other book that I read this year, so I wanted to give some more books of his a try. The main issue I had was that I just had no idea what I was reading. I still have honestly no idea what this book was about. I know it says it like on the cover, but like as I was reading it, I still had no idea what he was trying to say or what he was trying to get across. And the writing was still the same as What is the Bible, which for some reason, like, I'm not a fan of the writing, but it still makes me want to read more. I don't understand how that happens. Anyway, I gave this 2 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was a recommendation from a friend of mine, and that is Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. I had no plans of ever actually like picking this up and reading it, but since my friend recommended it and I trust his opinion, I decided to just go ahead and give it a try. It wasn't like an all-time favorite of mine. It wasn't one that I ever like want to go back and read again, but it was enjoyable in the moment. This is another nonfiction about Trevor Noah, and if you don't know who he is, what is he? Is that the late, it's some sort of like talk show that he's the host of. I find him very funny, and I like him on the talk shows very much. His political humor is on point. But this is just his story about him growing up in Africa and about how he was born from a white male and a black woman during apartheid. So technically, he was a crime. It was very fascinating and very interesting. Like, I liked the chapters separately from each other, but again, I like my nonfiction books to be in like a linear order. This was all over the place chapters wise. I could not tell where we were, so it kind of bugged me in that sense. So I don't think it was like organized very well, but I still enjoyed the stories separately from each chapter. I also like that he started off each chapter with like a little backstory or a little like history lesson to kind of help you understand what's going to happen in the chapter. I liked that a lot. It was just also like a very slow read for me. I don't know why this took me so long to read, but it did. So I was very like interested and invested in the story that he was telling and in the characters, especially his mom. I was so interested in what was going to happen to his mom. I was kind of just like, I guess maybe just expecting more of his humor that I've seen in his videos, but I felt like there was no humor in this book. And I was just like really expecting at least some humor, some like witty lines here and there, but none of that. So essentially, I liked the story, I just don't think I liked the editing of the story. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. The next book I read is One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I love Taylor Jenkins Reid. She's probably like one of my all-time favorite authors. So I'm trying to like get through all of her books. This was next on my list, and oh my goodness, again, another fantastic read. We follow a woman who, you know, was married, had this great relationship with this guy, and then he goes off to Alaska and something happened with the helicopter that he was in, or like the airplane that he was in or something, and he is missing and presumed dead. And 4 years go by, she's got a life, she's got a new man in her life that she is engaged to and about to be married to, and then her dead husband comes back. I really liked the main character. I felt she was very relatable and she had really great development throughout the whole story. This was one of those books where like I was not sure what the ending was going to be, and I wasn't sure what I wanted the ending to be, but I think ultimately I was satisfied with the end, and I thought they explained Emma, the main character, her emotions and her decision making well. I felt like the whole book in and of itself was written very well. It's very emotional. I cried a lot. It's like sad but also happy at the same time. It was like very confusing, and this was one that I was just able to fly through super quickly. So it's not probably like my favorite of hers, but still one that I really loved, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was Twelfth Night by William Shakespeare. I was like most excited to read this one because I love She's the Man, and She's the Man is based off of Twelfth Night. So we have Viola, who her and her twin brother were like washed up on shore, but separately, so they don't actually know that the other one is alive. And Viola dresses up as a man, I forget why, and she ends up falling in love with Orsino. And Orsino is like, is he like a prince? I feel like he's semi like a prince or something. Orsino is obsessed with Olivia, like in love with her. She doesn't want anything to do with him, but Viola loves Orsino, and Orsino only sees Viola as a dude. And then there's like a bunch of other like side characters that add some like humor to it. But that's essentially like the main plot theme, and then like Sebastian is off doing, her twin brother's off doing his own thing. Anyway, this is one of his comedies. Not one of my favorites, but I still enjoyed it. I think I like the movie better. But maybe that's just because the movie has so much nostalgia to me. There isn't a whole lot of resolution with the characters. And not all the characters, just like some of the characters, and I just feel like it ended very abruptly and like really fast. I loved Feste. He was my favorite character. He was like the voice of reason, even though he's like a jester, which I found funny. He was like very witty with his lines and his comebacks. I actually really enjoyed the relationship between Viola and Orsino. Even when she was a man and he thought she was a man, I thought like their little bromance was really cute. Some of the other romances just felt really rushed compared to Viola and Orsino's. It's a great plot. I love it, but it's just kind of like an okay Shakespeare play to me. But I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I read, or semi-read because I did not finish it, aka I DNF'd it, and that is Why We Broke Up by Daniel Handler, and the art is by Maria Kalman. As you can tell, I did not technically read a classic this month, which I was trying to read one classic each month, and I'm not including a Shakespeare play as a classic because that, I feel like to me that's cheating because that's its own separate challenge for this year. So I did not read a classic this month, and I'm very upset about that because now I have ruined my challenge for the year. Anyway, so I DNF'd Why We Broke Up. This is a story where each chapter begins with like a picture of some item. So let me see if I can get a better item. Here we go. Like there's an item. And why that item caused their relationship to break up. It's almost like written as a letter from the girl to the guy being like, remember this thing, like returning his stuff or whatever, and being like, this thing is a reason why we broke up. And so you just see like the story that is attached to that item. I did not care for the narrator slash main character. She was very complainy and very whiny, and I just could not stand her. Also, there were so many run-on sentences. The story was also just like not grasping my attention. Like I thought the concept was really interesting, but actually reading it was not really interested in any of the characters. I didn't care where any of them ended up or what they did. I don't care. She also kept repeating herself a lot, which really bugged me. So it was like a nice premise, but there was something off about it, and it just felt like it was trying too hard. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. Now on to the books that I read in May, which were part of a readathon, and it was the OWLs, or the Magical Readathon. And for that, they went, Book Roast, who creates this readathon, she went above and beyond. I can put a link below to her explaining the readathon, like a video of her explaining it, because I'm not going to do a good job explaining it. But essentially, there was a bunch of different like magical careers that you could choose from, and when you chose your career, it like told you what books you had to read, or like what classes you had to accomplish in order to get your owls to become that career. I originally wanted to be working in the Ministry of Magic in the Department of Law and Enforcement, but I didn't accomplish one of the owls. So when I finished reading my books for that month, I had to go through all of the careers and decide which one actually works with the books that I read. I am now a Hogwarts professor. So now when it comes to August and I have to do my notes, hopefully I can accomplish the Hogwarts professor one. Like a letter to welcome you, and then also all the prompts that you have to read. And then here is the pamphlet of like all the careers. Anyway, so Hogwarts professor is what I decided on. Hogwarts professor. So for my owls, I had to pass 7 owls, so I read 7 books. 1 was for a subject that I wish to teach, Defense Against the Dark Arts, and then 5 additional subjects of my choice. So let's go into this. So let's start with Defense Against the Dark Arts. And for that, you had to read a title that starts with R. I did my Shakespeare play for that month, and it's Romeo and Juliet. This is a reread for me. I've read this multiple times because middle school, high school, you had to read this book a bunch. I've also watched the movies multiple times. The 60s version is the best. Just saying. So like I know the story and I enjoy the story when I'm like watching it and reading it and stuff, so it was great going back and reading it again. But of course, like, the issues that I have with the story are still there. If you don't know the story of Romeo and Juliet, I'm not going to explain it. Just look it up. You should know it already. Like, the main issue, pretty much, that I have with this is that the love between the 2 main characters is so childish, so immature, happens so quickly, and they're so rash about it. And it's just, like, very insta-lovey. But this, their romance brings about some really great lines. And also, I think the love creates a really great message in the end. So even though it's a bit extreme, I still like what it says. Mercutio and the nurse are my favorite characters in the play. I don't want to focus too much on this one because I have read it multiple times and I feel like lots of people have read this book, but I still give it 4 out of 5 stars. Next was a book that I had to, what was it? A subject that I wanted to teach. For that one I chose herbology. And herbology was to read a book with a plant on the cover. So for that one, I read All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven. This is like a coming of age story about 2 teens that are from like polar opposites at school. Like they're not alike at all. Like she's popular, he's a loner and like a weirdo, and they both find themselves on top of the school building at the same time trying to commit suicide, and so they each like help each other to not do it. And then from there it kind of forms this like friendship where like they're the only ones that like they can actually talk to each other about their issues and why they were wanting to commit suicide. But then it like turns into this romance and it's so heartbreaking. I, honest to God, read this book in one sitting. I don't do that often. And because it's so emotional, it just ripped my heart out. And I think that's because I got so invested in the characters and I really enjoyed their relationship with each other. Just there's so many emotions, it's so much heaviness and heavy topics, so it does deal with a lot of different types of mental illnesses, so just be aware of that going into this. But overall, really loved it, 5 out of 5 stars. Then I was to choose 5 topics of my own, just like random topics. So I just looked through the books that I read and I was like, okay, where can they fit? So let's start with Muggle Studies, which was to read a contemporary. So I'm like looking at the notes because I can't actually remember. So it's a contemporary. For that one, I read The Sun Is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon. I mainly read this because I wanted to watch the movie and I wanted to read the book before I watched the movie because the movie came out in the month of May. I was not a fan of Everything by Nicola Yoon, so going into this I wasn't expecting a whole lot, but I actually really like this one. I definitely like this one a lot better than Everything. This one wasn't predictable. I didn't see the ending coming. I had no idea how it was going to end. Again, another book that I wasn't sure how I wanted it to end, but either way I was still satisfied with the end. Because I think it was also like a very realistic ending, but it was also just an ending that felt complete and made me feel happy. At first, the chapters that dealt with like outsider perspective, or the chapters that were like from Fate's point of view, from Hare's point of view, and like from all those things, they felt very like unneeded and unnecessary, but halfway through it kind of started to click why she was doing that, and it actually does add to the story, and 'cause, like, I don't want to destroy the ending of the story, because the ending of this is different from the ending in the movie. In the beginning I didn't like those, but like I understood halfway through why she was doing it, and I really appreciated the fact that she did that. And it did add to the story more than I thought it was going to. It was a super easy read, and I was surprised that this didn't feel insta-lovey, because this whole book takes place in one day. I just realized I never described the premise of this book. It's about these two characters. One, she is originally from Jamaica, and her family are here illegally, and they've been found out, so now they are being deported tomorrow. The other guy is not happy with his life, and his parents are putting so much pressure on him to be something and do something that he doesn't want to be and do. But him and her end up meeting by fate or by accident or whatever. He ends up saving her life, and they end up just kind of spending the whole day together and falling in love. It is insta-lovey, but it doesn't feel insta-lovey as you're reading it, because it really takes you on that journey and it builds up to it very nicely. The two main characters, the like love interests, I really liked their characters as individuals, but I also think that they really complemented each other very well. And I really liked that their different ethnicities played into who they are and were like a big part of the story in general. This is definitely a story and a book that is going to stay with me. Just like this one is. I like that it's not a very like authentic type of story, but it feels authentic. Anyway, I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next is Ancient Runes, and for that I had to read a retelling. So I read Much Ado About Mean Girls by William Shakespeare and Ian Dosher. There is honestly not much to say about this book, thank God, because I feel like this video is already super long. This is the movie Mean Girls as if Shakespeare wrote it. So all of their lines are in iambic pentameter. They even have like cute little pictures here and there. It's really funny. I don't know what it has to do with Much Ado About Nothing. I think they maybe just used the title to put it with Mean Girls. It's a fun time. I highly recommend it if you're a fan of Mean Girls or if you're a fan of Shakespeare. Like, it's just a fun romp. So I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. I didn't know how to really rate this one. Then the next subject I chose was History of Magic. For that, I had to read a book that was published at least 10 years ago. So that was my classic. I read a classic this month, unlike last month. So I read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. This was gifted to me at Christmas time by a friend of mine who really enjoys the story. And I was not skeptical at first, but it was just like one of those books that I never felt the urge to really pick up and read. So I'm happy that he gave it to me. This is a nonfiction about Maya Angelou's life and her time living in the South during the Depression. It is a slow read, but I kind of enjoyed that about it. Usually I don't like slow reads, but I liked that about this one because I just really wanted to soak everything in. It did also like start off very slow, but like somewhere in the middle I kind of started to get very invested. I know where, I just don't want to spoil it and say what exactly happened that like got me really invested in the story. It just wanted me to like keep reading. I do think the ending felt abrupt, and I wanted more. Like, I wanted to know what happens after that. And unfortunately, we are never going to get a sequel to this, which I really want, because that ending was just not satisfying enough for me. The language she uses is great. The way she like words things and the way she tells a story is just so like lyrically beautiful. I also just like that she covers a lot of like hard and heavy topics very tastefully. I enjoyed this. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Next was Potions, and for that it was a next ingredient, so I had to read a sequel. And for that I read Arusha and the Song of Death by Roshni Chakshi. This is the second book in the Pandava Quartet. I love this series. This is such a fun and funny series. It's a children's series that deals with Indian mythology. Am I right in saying that? I really enjoyed the first one, and so when the second one came out, I immediately picked it up and started reading it. Thank God it fit one of the the things here. But we follow Arusha, who is, you know, like an 11-year-old kid, I want to say, and she finds out that she is a Pandava, and she has to go on like these quests, these like mythical quests with her Pandava sisters to like save the world and save like the mythical world and the underworld and like all that stuff. It's a very fun time. So as you could tell, I loved going back to this world. It's also just like super creative. In this book we get 2 new characters that really add some like more dynamics to like relationships and like as like just a dynamic in the story. I would have liked for the Sleeper to have shown up in this book. The Sleeper was the villain in the first book, and I felt like the Sleeper was going to be the villain for every book, but I just feel like maybe we like put a pause on the Sleeper, which I don't understand why we did that. Maybe it'll make sense in like the next coming books, but yeah, I wish the Sleeper would have at least shown up somewhere. I also really missed Boo. I don't want to give anything away, but like Boo was barely in this book, and I really missed his witty banter. It's paced really well. It's got great humor, so I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. And then the last book that I read this month was for the topic or the subject of astrology, where I had to read a book with star in the title. So I read Stardust by Neil Gaiman. I read a Neil Gaiman book a while back, like a couple years ago, and I was not a fan of it. I actually DNF'd that one. But I still wanted to give a Neil Gaiman book a chance, and so picked up Stardust. I did watch the movie maybe like 2 years ago, and this was not the biggest fan of the movie, so I was a little skeptical going into this one, and I didn't really like this one too much. I'm so sorry. Maybe I still want to give Neil Gaiman a chance though. I feel like I will like Neil Gaiman, it's just the ones that I've been reading I haven't been liking. So this is just like a fantasy story that I have no idea how to describe. We follow a bunch of different characters and a bunch of like different storylines that do eventually weave together. So I liked that aspect about the story. Even though at the beginning it was a little rough because it was just like a bunch of separate little stories and you don't see how they're going to weave together, but then again, they do weave together. So I like how they wove together the story, and it's a very creative story. Like my mind would not have been able to have like come up with something like this. I guess I just kind of felt like there was too much going on and it just took a while for them all to connect with each other. The ending felt so flat to me. The ending did nothing for me. It was not satisfying of an end for me. And another thing that like really bugged me, like this might have bugged me the most about the story, but the 2 main characters, I don't know how, I don't know when, and I don't know why they fell in love. Like, they hated each other, and then all of a sudden, they liked each other. And I was like, where's the middle? How and when did this happen? So I couldn't get on board with their relationship because I had no idea why they were all of a sudden just like loving each other. It was okay. I didn't hate it. Even though I just feel like I said a bunch of things that I didn't like about the book. Like, there were some things I liked about it. I mean, it was like a fun story, but it was just okay. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. And there you have it. Those are all the books that I read in the months of April and May. Please also go check out my April and May movie wrap-up, as well as just my April and May life wrap-up. And yes, that is it for this video. I will hopefully see you guys soon with more videos.